Assalamualaikum and very good morning to all of you, my dear students of 11th standard. Today we will start our next unit, that is Morphology of Angiospermic plants. Morphology of Angiospermic plants or flowering plants. Now, what is morphology? Morphology is actually a Greek word, morph. Morph meaning form or structure, and logos means study. In simpler terms, we can say morphology is a study of structure and form, right? We can write it as it is a study of structure, form, as well as relative position of organs, right? Now, this morphology has been broadly divided into two groups. One is two different groups. One is external morphology, and second is internal morphology. Right? Under this heading, external morphology, we study an outlook of an organism. What is an outlook? We can study its structure, we can study its outer shape, we can study its color, and also we can study its size, right? That means size, study of outer structure, study of color, and at times study of shape, right? Now, this internal morphology includes study of internal structures. This internal morphology has been further delimited into two parts. One is anatomy and second is histology, right? Under this heading, there are two different fields. One is anatomy and second is histology. What is anatomy? Anatomy is a Greek word. Ana means again, and tomin means to cut. Thus, we can say when we see any parts, after dissecting it, we call it as anatomy. That means study of internal structures after dissection is known as anatomy. Thus, we can write it as study of internal structure. After dissecting living organism. We talk about plants, that means after dissecting plant body, we see internal structures. That study is known as anatomy. Now second part is histology. Histology, histo mean tissue or sometimes whole, and logs means study. That means when we study the tissues are internal structures. That comes under the heading of histology. So we can write it as it is a study of tissues, their composition, and structure. As we all know that tissues are of two types. One is simpler tissue and second is complex tissue. To study their composition and their structure is known as histology. It comes in everyone's mind, why to study morphology? What are the underlying reasons to study morphology? What is its importance? That means we have to first know what is its importance. Importance of morphological studies. Right. First, after knowing the external structure of plant or animal, we can easily guess that this is Juglonus regia or walnut plant, this is Salix alba or willow plant, this is Populus plant, it is, or which group it belongs. That means it helps us in identification of organisms, identification of living organisms. When we identify plants, it becomes easy to classify them into different groups. Are they lower animals? Are they higher animals? Are they lower plants? Are they higher plants? Are they monocots or dicots? That means second important aspect of this study is it helps us in classifying organisms. These two aspects are usually dependent on external morphology. When we study internal structures, that means complexity as well as simplicity of tissues as well as other structures. That means that too helps us delimitation of organisms, right? That means study of internal complexity as well as simplicity of living organisms further help us in delimitation of species. Some species in outer outlook or outer appearance looks alike, but when we study their internal structures, there is both complexity as well as some simple structures. By identifying this complexity, we can easily delimit the organisms. That means these are three. And fourth is, in breeding experiments, morphological traits are analyzed. That means when we are keen to develop some hybrids by crossing two different varieties, at that time we usually monitor their morphological traits. That means in breeding experiments, morphology is also an important field or tool. These are few important or significance of morphological studies. It helps us in identification, classification, and sometimes when we are not able to identify or delimit the plants on their outlook, we study their internal morphology, that is complexity and as well as simplicity of organs. And finally, it also helps us in breeding experiments, as there we study usually morphological traits. Now, after knowing the importance of morphology, after having a brief outlook of this what is morphology, what is its significance, now we will directly start our topic, that is morphology of angiospermic plants. What are angiospermic plants? Those plants which bear seeds but are hidden. Those plants which have seeds, but those seeds are hidden. Where? In ovaries. In ovary, which later on develops into a fruit. Same ovary, at the time after fertilization of male and female gamete, the result is in the formation of fruit. That means within the fruit there are seeds hidden. That is why we call them as angiosperms. Angio means hidden and sperma means seed, hidden seeds. These plants are also called flowering plants because they have a special structure for reproduction, that is a flower. Flower consists of usually four parts. One is calyx, outer green cover or leaves. After that there is a second whorl known as corolla, usually colored, and after that androecium, male gamete forming organ, and finally gynoecium, that is female or egg developing organ. That means usually it is of four parts, and this structure is known as flower. Those plants which bear such a specialized structure for reproduction, we call them as flowering plants, and same flowering plants are also known as angiospermic plants, as these plants develop seeds within this ovary and later on remains. You know now what is angiosperms, what are angiospermic plants. Let us draw a representative plant of angiosperms here to study its different structures. From this sketch, you can easily identify broadly two parts. One is above ground part and second is below ground part. This below ground part is known as root system, and this is known as above ground part is known as shoot system. Right? Let us start with root system. Root system is underground part of plant. So we can write it as it is an underground part of plant. Right? Second character of it is non-green. It is not green as there is low content of chloroplast as well as chlorophyll. That means it is non-green part. Of plant. Third, it is descending towards the center of gravity. That means it is positively geotropic. Positively geotropic. Any object which shows its movement towards the gravity, we call them as positively geotropic. The root system of plants usually grow towards the center of earth. That is why we call them as they are positively geotropic. But they move away from the source of light. They move away from the source of light. That is why we call them as negatively phototropic. That is, they are negatively phototropic. Photo means light and tropic means movement, right? These are few characters of root system. What are their functions? What are the functions of root system? Primary functions of roots are they fix plants. They fix plants. That means help the plant to withstand at any specified position. Second, they help They help plants to absorb water. Third, help plants to absorb minerals. These are few primary functions of roots. One is fixation of plant, that means helps the plant to withstand at a specified position. Second is it helps the plant to absorb the moisture or water from soil. And third, it helps the plant to absorb minerals which are required for the function or other metabolic processes within the plant. Now, structure of root. Root consists of primarily four parts. Four parts. We can draw a root, representative of root here. Right, this is a rootlet. If we this magnify here and we found this like that, right? There is an apical portion. This is known as root apex. Over the root apex, there is a bulge or mass of cells. We call it as root cap. Bulging or mass of cells known as root cap. That means first part is root cap. Root cap is made up of thin walled cells, cells secrete mucilage. This cap contains the thin walled cells, and those cells secrete a mucilage, and mucilage helps the plant to penetrate deep into the soil. That means this cap helps the plant to penetrate into the soil, right? That means this cap protects the growing apex of root. These cells get decayed, damaged, and later on formed again. This root cap is also known as calyptra. From calyptrogen, right? This is first part. What is it? Root cap. Root cap is a mass of cells covering the root apex or growing point of root. This mass of cells protect this growing point of root as they secrete mucilage, and this mucilage helps this root to penetrate into the soil, right? It is also known as calyptrogen. And second part is known as meristematic zone. Zone. What is meristematic zone? Above this root apex, root cap, there is a zone of cells known as meristematic zone. You all know that meristems are cells which have tendency to continuously divide. Thus we can say meristematic zone is a zone of cells which continuously divide. Zone of continuously dividing cells, right? This is zone of continuously dividing cells. In this zone, the cells divide and move in two directions. One is towards the apex and second is towards the base. Cells divide. For instance, this cell divides. One moves towards the base and second moves towards the apex. Those cells which move towards the apex results in formation of a cellular mass known as calyptrogen. And those cells are responsible for the formation of root cap, while as other part which moves towards the base known as histogen and results in the formation of other cells and other tissues, right? Now we can say one is root cap, second part is meristematic zone of cells which continuously divide and form two types of cellular mass. One is calyptrogen and second is histogen. From calyptrogen develops root cap, and from histogen develops other cells or other tissues. Now third part. Third part of this root is zone of elongation. Above the meristematic zone, there is a zone of cells which is known as zone of elongation, right? Zone of elongation. In this part, the cells which are formed in the zone of meristematic zone get enlarged in size. They get enlarged in size. That is why we call them as elongated cells or zone of elongation, right? In this part, cells get elongated in size, accumulate mass of cytoplasm, have active nucleus. This is all about zone of elongation. It is considered and found that plants usually absorb minerals or water usually in this part. That means these are thin walled cells, these are elongated cells, as well as active and high content of cytoplasm is present in these cells. Thus, it is considered as part of absorption. Right? Above this part is the final part, that is fourth part, that is zone of maturation. Zone of maturation. Now cells first formed in meristematic zone, they get elongated in size, accumulate high content of cytoplasm, have active nucleus, and after that they have to perform different functions within the root. And thus that means they have to get modified or differentiated in different parts. That means some cells will form xylem tissue, some will form phloem tissue, some will form cortical cells, some will form epidermal cells. That is known as differentiation or maturation. That means from this part above the cells start maturing. Right? That is why we call this phase as zone of maturation. Zone of maturation. Right? This is final zone. After elongation we found another part of root, that is known as zone of maturation. In this part cells are destined to form different parts of root. Some form vascular bundles, some form outer cortical part or epidermal part. That means they get matured. Right? In this part, usually the roots which arise, one is called the root which is first root, which is known as primary root. The roots which develop from primary root are called secondary roots, and those roots which develop from secondary roots are called tertiary roots. It is usually found that roots which arise from primary roots are known as secondary roots and usually found to arise from this part. This part of plant. That means secondary roots or tertiary roots usually arise from maturation zone of root. Right? Now you understood what are the different parts of root. First is root cap, second is zone of meristematic zones, third is zone of elongation, and finally it is zone of maturation. And side by side we have little information about this was all about roots, root structure, root function, and its nature. Now, if the roots are of two types, roots are of two types. One is known as primary root, or tap root, usually known as tap root, and second is known as adventitious root. As we all know, plants grow from a miniature structure which is known as seed. Right? Within the soil, the seed gets germinated and form a small miniature plant that is like this. Above this part is known as epicotyle, and below this part is known as hypocotyle. This part is known as epicotyle, above cotyledonous. These are storage parts, these are known as cotyledonous, and this is known as epicotyle above, and this is known as hypocotyle. and this part is known as coleoptile also, or this is known as coleorhiza, right? The tip of this hypocotyle, there is a mass of cells known as radicle, designated as radicle, and there at this tip there is a mass of meristematic cells known as pilumule, form pilumule. When roots, normally what happens, roots develop from this part, from what? Radical part. If roots develop from radical part, we call them as tap roots. That means they originated from original part from which they have to develop. That means those roots which develop from radical are known as tap roots. Tap roots or taproot system. While in contrast, when roots develop from any other part from this, any other part from radical, then we call them as adventitious roots. What are adventitious roots? Those roots which don't develop from radical but arise from any other part. They may be from pilumular part or some other part, stem or any other part. We call them as adventitious roots. Roots develop from any other part other than radical. Thus we can say roots are of two types. One is taproot system. Those roots which originally develop from radical are known as taproots, and while those roots which arise from any other part other than radical, we call them as adventitious roots. This taproot system show branching pattern. That means this root which first arises from radical is known as primary root, and the roots which arise from this primary root are known as secondary roots, and those roots which arise from these secondary roots are known as tertiary roots. That means taproot system usually form web-like structure, primary root, from which there arise secondary roots, and from them arises tertiary roots. Now this primary root or taproot system are further two types. We can write here as roots. One is taproot system. Second is adventitious root system. Right? Develops from radical part. Develop from other parts other than radical. Right? This type of root is further of two types. One is surface feeder, and second is deep feeder. What I've seen in fields or in agricultural fields that some plants show their root patterns like this. If this is a plant, they have their roots like this. They don't penetrate deep into the soil but spread on the surface or beneath the surface. Those roots which spread beneath the soil surface but don't penetrate deep into the soil are called surface feeders. Usually they are small plants, herbaceous, or sometimes shrubby plants, which are surface feeders, don't penetrate roots deep into the soil. right? In contrast, plants with huge body and big bodied plants, they, to withstand, they penetrate roots deep into the soil for fixation as well as for absorption. Those plants which penetrate deep into the soil surface are called deep feeders. Penetrate roots deep into the soil. Deep into the soil. That means taproots are further up two types. One is surface feeders, second is deep feeders. Surface feeders are those plants which don't penetrate deep into the soil but spread beneath the surface of soil. In contrast, deep feeders are those plants which are heavyweight plants, big plants. They penetrate deep into the soil for fixation, for withstanding, as well as for absorption of minerals and water. This is all about today's lecture. Inshallah, in next lecture we will start with modifications of root, both first tap roots and second adventitious roots. Till then, Allah Hafiz and stay blessed.